Quem jogava videogame nos anos 90 deve lembrar com carinho da Console Wars, ou Guerra dos Consoles em bom português. Eram aqueles tempos em que o Super Nintendo e o Mega Drive da Sega lutavam pelos corações e mentes de jogadores de todo mundo. Foi uma das épocas mais interessantes dos videogames, muito bem retratada no livro Guerra dos Consoles, publicado por aqui pela editora Intrínseca. Eu tive o prazer de conversar por Skype com o autor, Blake J. Harris, e descobrir um pouco mais sobre os bastidores da obra e da indústria como um todo. Eu espero que você goste do nosso papo.
Hey everyone, you may not know, but before I wrote Console Wars, my day job was trading commodities in a financial brokerage for Brazilian clients, like Raizon and Copersucar, Petrobras. So I was trading coffee and soybeans and sugar, and I love Brazil. I've always had a special place in my heart. I worked there for 8 years, so it's great to be talking to you. That's a great question. My life completely changed. I mean, I guess it changed a little bit before the book came out because, like I said, before Console Wars, I had a day job. I wake up at 5:30 or 6 and go into the city and trade commodities. So writing was my dream. And with Console Wars, I got to do it full time. But, to your question about the reaction, it was incredible. I did not know what to expect. Before the book came out, the only people who had ever read my writing was like my mom and my wife. So to have strangers all across the world reading it, that in itself was very cool. And then the fact that most people seemed to really like it was cool. And then, of course, there were people who did not like it. And that was an interesting experience, too. I mean, I think that is good for two reasons. One, sometimes the people who don't like it actually have good criticisms, which has helped me get better as a writer. And then the other is, I remember at first when the book came out, and there were some bad reviews. I was really sad, or it was unusual to me. But just sort of getting used to, like, that there's some negativity out there, and that's not everything. But like I said, Console Wars changed my life. I have met so many great fans of the book, or Sega, or Nintendo, or just video games in general over the past few years. And that has been amazing. One of the things I really liked about the idea of Console Wars before I wrote it was that just when I mentioned the idea to friends or anyone really, everyone had their own stories. It wasn't like they wanted to hear what the behind-the-scenes story I was working on, but it reminds me of the time for my 9th birthday I got this or whatever. So, it's been so great that this is a book where we can connect about Tom Kalinske or Peter Main or Sonic or Mario, but also it's such a personal experience for so many people, and that's been great. And then just moving forward, I am a writer, and I wanted to write a second book, and it was so much easier having written Console Wars to get interviews and just to do the things that you wouldn't normally think of, or just that had friction. And so I have a new book that's almost done, and it is happened because of Console Wars, so that was great as well. Well, first I just want to say that it's, I obviously like the style because I choose to write that way, because I enjoy reading that way. But it was so interesting to me that some of the bad reviews said, like, oh, this is so false. And then I have the people that it's actually about telling me, oh, you totally captured it. This is so true. So it's just very weird that people who were not there saying this is not true, and people who were there saying you got it. There's just an odd disconnect. But yeah, even before the book came out, we were supposed to do a movie with Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg and Scott Rudin, and we had been developing that for the past few years. And then eventually, at some point, we decided to do it as a TV show, which I was very happy about because the book is 550 pages. I certainly, liked I thought it was a long story. So when they were doing it as like a 90-minute movie, I was obviously very supportive, and it was great. But to see that it's going to be over 8 episodes or 10 episodes or 12 episodes is going to be so much better. And where we are right now is we have Jordan Voight-Roberts directing it and Mike Rosolio writing it, and Mike has been writing outlines for the series and for the pilot episode, and I've been reading them and give some feedback, but mostly it's very, very good. Oh, it's a really good question. So I would say that the two hardest ones for me, they were hard in different ways. You know, Tom Kalinske is probably one of the nicest guys and most approachable guys I've ever met. You know, like I think that reads that way in the book. You see that he's just a very outgoing, friendly guy who gives people the time of day. And, you know, but for me, that was like my first ever big interview. So having not interviewed anybody before, that was hard. But fortunately, he made it very easy on me I would just ask like one question, he'd talk for 10 minutes. And, you know, I probably interviewed him. He was probably like the 20th or 30th person I interviewed. So I had interviewed Al before that. I had interviewed some people, and it was really hit or miss. In general, people were more friendly and receptive to the idea that I would have expected for someone who had never written a book before. And I think that was just because this was such a special time in their life. So, you know, even though who knows if I was ever going to publish the book or what was going to happen, they'd spend an hour talking to me. What was the worst that could happen? And then in terms of like the most difficult interview to actually arrange, and that I thought was very important, was Nakayama-san. He had not replied to me. I did not really expect him to, given his reputation. And then I happened to be in Japan doing a freelance documentary for a documentary project for Sega. And then he sent me an email out of the blue and said that, you know, be at your hotel at 4 p.m. on Friday, and I'll have someone pick you up. And then I was brought to his house. And I remember I walked. His home is beautiful. It's like the third biggest home in Tokyo. And I walked into this big, gigantic room, and it was like a big dining room table. It was big, not dining room. It was like a big office type of table. Could fit like 15 people. No one was there. Nothing was on the table except for brochures for private jets. And it was like, obviously someone put that there for my benefit. I don't think he happened to be looking at private jet brochures right before I got there. And then we spoke for a few hours, and it was very fascinating. Well, that's interesting because I should mention for your viewers and listeners that, you know, the book, like you said, came out in 2014. That's almost 5 years ago. Unfortunately, I've forgotten a little bit of this stuff, but I vaguely remember, and it makes more sense now you said it, when I was speaking with Peter Main one time, who was the vice president of sales and marketing at Nintendo. I was asking about other territories and asking, because I like Brazil, like, oh, how come you guys didn't have a very strong presence in Brazil? And it was because of the gray market and, like the illegal, the pirating, and that happens in any industry. Maybe it shouldn't, but it happens. But Nintendo was so focused on controlling that, like, they were like, no, we're just not going to go there if we're going to lose money, or not lose money, but not be able to get that money. So I thought it's interesting, Yeah, there were so many stories. Like, I interviewed over 200 people, and everyone had at least like one or two good stories. Some of them didn't match up with other people's stories, but it was very hard, and it was very hard for me as a first-time writer. And in the end, I tried to sort of put the book ahead of my ego and their egos, and just do what was best for like the overall narrative, and to try to tell like the legacy of Sega, at least from the business side. But sometimes I had to not include some really good stories. A lot of them were with athletes, because I always like sports games. So there was some good ones with Michael Jackson coming to the office. The ones that come to mind, though, most immediately are the EA Sports ones, because I was a big sports video game fan. And just personally, I loved NHL 94. And I remember one of the developers telling me how he went to the NHLPA Players Association meeting, like I think it was in San Diego in 1993, and Igor Krupman, or an enforcer in the NHL, came up to him and gave him a really hard time because he had given him a 0 intelligence rating. And I just love that idea of like, these geeky video game guys, designers, connecting with like these bulky athletes in what was becoming this, connection of their different mediums. Yeah, you're asking very good questions. So once again, this is a book I spent a long time on. The Console Wars I spent 3 years. This one I spent like 3.5 years. And I mentioned that because if you had asked me this question 3 years ago, I probably would have been more optimistic about virtual realities, specifically with regards to video games. I mean, that was what initially interested me. I had worked on Console Wars. I loved the video game industry. And then you had Oculus that was, they started on Kickstarter. They raised a couple $1 million, and their whole promise was to step into the game, that they were going to be this device that helped you go through the screen. And it was targeted towards gamers. And that was a great medium or a great marketing approach for this medium because at the time, and still somewhat to this day, you needed a high-end performance computer. So it was really only PC gamers or people who happen to have like graphic designers. And so it just seemed like a perfect match. And then Oculus sold to Facebook in 2014 for $3 billion. And that gave them the resources to do a lot of things and a lot of things for the industry, which I admired. I have complicated feelings about Facebook, but I love that they put so much money into virtual reality. But at the same time, I do think that they stopped focusing on the gaming market and really missed a big opportunity. And so, as per your original question, like, will it be a part of gaming, or where do I see the future? In the long run, I'm still bullish on virtual reality, and I think that if they can find a way to incorporate the esports aspect and make it more of a community aspect, that would be really great. But they haven't done a good job so far. It's been interesting, I remember when Oculus first started and virtual reality sort of became popular again, everyone thought, oh, first-person shooters, like, it's so much better. Now you're just in the game. But those haven't been as popular. Sometimes some of them are more nausea-inducing also. So where we thought that would kind of be like the killer app, it hasn't really proven to be. But I think it really is going to come down to the killer apps, which is a nebulous proposition. But as great as Nintendo was, would they have been so successful without Mario at the start, or and Sega too? That the Master System, Genesis 16-bit system came out 2 years before Sonic, but it wasn't super popular until Sonic. So it is not always, my book is a lot about the hardware industry, but as we see with Sega and all these others, it becomes about software. And Facebook certainly is focused on the social aspect. Valve and HTC, Valve makes great games, but not very often. So I hope that they're working on something for VR to excite the industry. And then Sony, I really admire Sony. They were sort of later to the game, but they have been doing what I would have expected Oculus to do, making a lot of investment in content. And slowly but surely, they have been selling a couple million headsets, which is a small amount compared to the PS4 in total. But I still do see it as the future. I think that I think about it a little bit more like consoles, because to sort of like use a stereotype, you would say like the smartphones, tablet gaming, casual gaming. That's who you're appealing to, and consoles, $300, $400, $500 investment. It's a little bit more devoted gamers. The people who are going to spend maybe a few hours a day or a few hours a week. And for something as immersive as virtual reality, where you're really getting a benefit from sustained activity, I think that it really would appeal to more of that demographic. So I guess that's a long-winded way of saying I still very much believe in virtual reality, but I'm disappointed by where it is now, and I'm disappointed by the events in my book. I wish that it was a little bit of a happier ending. I actually don't play a lot of video games, but I like Twitch. I like watching other people play. I think it's because I'm a bad player, but it really is like I love the artistic aspect of it. Like I almost am more excited by seeing the trailer of the game and imagining the possibilities than playing it. I mean, not really, but I think that has also helped me as a writer, that I am not someone who's spending 10 hours a week playing it. I'll spend a couple of hours and want to try out new stuff, but I do feel like I have been able to maintain somewhat of an outside perspective, which has helped me balance my storytelling between like between the software and the hardware and the business side. So, you know, I have come to love the gaming industry and the gaming community. I also think that, at least on social media, I see gaming community and gamers criticized in ways that they don't deserve. So I definitely would stand up for gamers. I have loved all my experiences, but I am not much of a gamer. Yeah, so my dirty secret that I would always get teased about from Al Milson and Tom and all the others was that I do love Nintendo games. I like, if I was going to be on a desert island, I got to pick one game. I'd pick either NHL 94 or Super Mario Bros. 3. And so Tom and Al, oh, come on, you got to do Sonic game. But as a kid, my experience was that my brother and I had an 8-bit NES system. I'm born in 1982, so I was like, a very young child, early teens, playing this stuff. And then around the time that Super Nintendo was coming out, so I guess I was only 9 years old at the time in 1991, my brother and I really, really, really wanted it because we loved our Nintendo. We wanted a new one. And our parents, who are very nice people, they would not get it for us because they said, my dad said that if Nintendo has a Super Nintendo now, they'll have a Super Duper Nintendo later, then a Super Super Duper Nintendo, and they felt like they were being like ripped off or something. I mean, he was right, I guess, but it was interesting because his real objection was that you couldn't play the 8-bit games on the 16-bit system, which was just sort of like conceptually hard for parents to wrap their heads around back then because there wasn't much precedent for this. And so, as an adult, when I first started with Console Wars, part of my inspiration was that, wow, someone in a boardroom somewhere or a team made a decision like, we are not going to make this backwardly compatible. We could, but it would cost $75 more or whatever it was, as I mentioned in the book. And because of that decision, I ended up getting a Sega and became a Sega kid. And I loved it because, like I said, I liked sports games. So I think Sega was definitely better with especially the EA Sports games. And then also being a kid at the time, and so much of my identity being formed by this thing that I loved. If I really felt like, all right, Sega's here, Nintendo's here, I definitely acted like it was like this, and I was like, fucking Nintendo sucks and all that. But so I was totally a Sega kid at the time. But like I said, my dirty little secret was that I do love Mario, and I think that nowadays what I play most is Nintendo games. I never really got into first-person shooters, so I just got smashed to play after I finished writing my book, and basically that Mario Kart, so that Mario Kart, and then I guess I've been playing NBA 2K19. So yeah. That's the best question. The question I think about every day because I loved the console wars to a degree. I think as long as there's a line that you can cross when you're talking to someone, arguing with them, and from my experience as a kid, maybe it was because I was a kid, it never crossed the line. It was always just language and jokes. But so my experience was always good with that, and I like that. Like I said, I felt like it helped form my identity. Unfortunately for me, though I think fortunately for others, Phil Spencer and Sony and not Nintendo's kind of off the side, but like the executives very explicitly and actively try to make peace. They don't even take veiled shots or make subtle jokes. And I think that it's probably a good business decision for them to do that. It's not worth the headache in certain cases, and but like personally, I wish it was a little bit different, and I think that part of it is because the two consoles feel so similar in a way. They're not, but I remember, especially when they first came out, when the Xbox One and PS4 came out, I felt like they each didn't have their own identity, and it took them a while to find it. And sometimes competition does bring out your identity. So I felt like I especially missed it at that time. And unfortunately, I don't think it's going to happen again. And that one is not just unfortunately for me, because I do think that I'm a big believer in competition breeding innovation. And if there was a company that competed with Sony and Microsoft in that way, or even a company that competed with Nintendo in sort of the more family-friendly console space, it would push all of them to do even better. But it is just so expensive. One of the interesting things about the time period in Console Wars was that, the games themselves cost $500,000 to a couple $1 million, so you can take much more risks. You can make a weird game like Toe Jam and Earl, and the consoles were very expensive R&D, a few $100 million, which is a lot of money, but it's not compared to what it is today. And so you can't take as many risks. Though one of the interesting developments, though I don't think it's had much of an impact on Console Wars, is that nowadays you probably would have a game like Toe Jam and Earl because of the indie development scene. And in fact, I think Toe Jam and Earl did a Kickstarter and had a new game. But those indie developers want to be on as many platforms as possible, and can't blame them. I would too if I were them. So, I think maybe I'm just a war profiteer who is bummed that there's no Console Wars, but I don't see it happening in the near future. Oculus was an interesting company to follow for that reason, because they were like the hot young video game company that did hardware. Very different, of course, because it was cutting edge technology and peripheral. But at the end of the day, even they ended up selling to Facebook largely because of the resources to compete with Valve and HTC or Sony, or just to do what they wanted to do. And so you think if a story like that, they ended up not remaining independent and not really, sort of more of like a if you can't beat them, join them situation. I don't think there's going to be Console Wars in the future. Yeah. So thank you for asking really good questions. I do a lot of interviews, and people don't usually ask good questions. So I always appreciate it when they do. And thanks to all your fans and viewers and listeners. For me, I wake up every day and I still have the mentality of someone who had to go to work from 9 to 5. And that was when I was doing the job with Brazil stuff, and I liked it, but it was still a job I didn't want to do. And so now it feels like I'm living my dream every day. And because I remember what it was like not to do that, I know the reason that I am living this dream is because of fans and readers out there. So I thank you for your enthusiasm and people for checking out this interview.